Alrighty folks, want to welcome you back for another video of Down the Rabbit Hole 2023. Well, I've already talked about the Hyper-V, talked about the network cable, the NIC, how that communicates. Be doing videos on Hyper-V configurations, NIC card configurations. I will be doing capture videos, all of those type of things later on that will follow these videos. The next part that was really the kicker of it all that I kind of was surprised about was the virtual operating systems that you can actually run on a Windows 10 unit, Windows 11 unit. What I thought was interesting is Windows 10 had the Windows 11 Developer Edition that ran on a computer that does not support Windows 11, or that Microsoft won't allow it to run on Windows 11, or let 11 run on it. So I kind of thought that was interesting. I wanted to play with that and test that. And of course, the Developer Edition was put out there to run on older systems to test the bugs anyways. So it wasn't as restricted, probably didn't have as many lockdowns and security features as the full version does. But it was interesting to see that. You can run Windows 10, you can run pretty much any kind of operating system you have that is designed for virtual, or if you have a CD to install on, if you have ISO installation, all the different kind of Linuxes, any kind of, I'm sure, IBM software, whatever other operating systems that are out there that I can't think of offhand, other than Windows based, can be run in there. Server based software can be run on there. Linux based, Ubuntu based, can be run on that Windows system, on the Hyper-V system. So I really thought that was really kind of an interesting thing, because I know in the old days I had a laptop, I've mentioned it, where I've had like 15 OSs installed, physically installed independently on the drive with separate partitions for the OS, boot sectors, all of that. Linux, all of those things were in there. And a lot of people said, well, why did you do that? Well, I wanted to see if I could and what I could put in it. Well, Hyper-V, you can do that. Of course, if you have a big enough drive, you can load in all kinds of stuff. Not to mention, you can load it in, and it's a standalone operating system. So it does not really affect any of your other virtuals. It does not affect your host machine. It's a separate, they're secure. They're completely different. Instead of putting it in there, if it corrupts your C drive, corrupts your boot files, corrupts anything else of that, then you crash the whole system, you have to restart. Hyper-V does not do that. It puts it off on a separate section, separate sections, and it secures everything it needs to. It's a standalone operating system in the operating system. If you've gone to the site that I've mentioned where they talk about people doing things illegally, calling you, trying to get money from you, all of these things, he uses a virtual system. That's basically what all this is. So that people can't access his physical system. If they do damage, he can wipe it out, reinstall, do whatever he needs to, has a recovery. They don't affect his main system, the host system. So these are some of those little features that I thought were interesting. Updates still need to be applied to virtual systems. They take them. They're not like boot systems where you put a system on a physical CD or USB that cannot take updates. You have sandboxing. Once you set the system up, you close it out, it goes away, you have to start all over. These are some features that are out there. But I really kind of wanted to just do a little short video to let everybody know about the OSs, the operating system, virtual systems, It's not only one host, one virtual. You can put multiple virtual systems. Again, the only warning I have, and a lot of warnings, that you don't want to do too many on one network physical connection. So if you're running a lot of OSs through a single port, you're going to slow down all your connections because of the one piece of hardware. You can get a dual NIC, you can get, like a 4-port NIC. You can buy a lot of things. You can buy the add-on cards. Got the video about add-on cards to explain some of that. But that's where a lot of the OS stuff comes involved. It's really kind of an interesting subject because that's what I used to do, is repartition hard drives and put in multiple OSs. You don't have to do any of that. You don't have to repartition drives anymore. You don't have to do any of that type of stuff. You can just set up a virtual. What was also nice is the systems were already set up to do a function. It was a Windows 10 OS system. Needed to add something more to the network. It was nice to know that now that system was running Windows 10 Pro. Load Hyper-V, load in your virtual OS. Depending on what software it is, like if it's on a Linux-based type thing, it comes on a core and all of that, and you get a key from the company for the OS, the program, everything gets registered with that key. That you can load that onto that system, making you have future growth on some of these new systems that are out there. The system it's on is not a very new system. It's a few years old. But it's nice to know you have that future growth, especially if you're at home. Maybe you're looking at starting a home business, starting your own graphics design, or starting something, a web hosting or web, and you might want a separate OS because maybe you're doing your hosting on a Linux system, not a Windows system. You're running a Windows system at home. You can then do the virtual system, a Linux system, on that system. And you can boot it up. You can go in. You can load what you need to. You can do what you need to. Test, configure. Maybe you're a programmer, some kind of engineering type things. Maybe you need that on a different OS. Maybe your work, everybody's working from home, starting to work from home. Did not really think of that concept, but maybe your work computer's a Linux computer. Do you really need to have two separate systems? If you're doing coding and stuff like that, and you just need to load it into that system, see what it does. Does the system crash? Does it do what? Whatever. It's not, it's a, let me think of the word, a lab computer. It's not a physical computer that you're using for other things. You're using it to run software on it and test real world performance. See what happens. You might want to just do a virtual. Instead of having two physical systems and switching monitors, or have two monitors and two keyboards and all of that stuff, you might want to do a virtual. So I know this video won't be too long, but I wanted to touch base on that to explain some of this, because this is a concept I've not really heard a lot of talk about, that I thought was really kind of an interesting thing that people might want to know, is you have some growth potential with this. Because now it's just not a Windows 10 computer. Now it can be a Windows 10 computer running server software, running Server 2021, running your security agent, scanning everything on your network, running Wireshark to see who's communicating to what and what's talking on your network, all on a separate independent OS that is not affecting your OS, not affecting what you are doing. It's not software preventing you from doing what you need to do on Windows 10, because that's on a separate system. That's just monitoring stuff. So, not system, separate OS. It can be on a completely different system in a different location. But you have that future development growth to know. Maybe you want to buy a server and you want to load in a DC, an email, a security software. Well, maybe you have a computer sitting around in your offices somewhere that nobody hardly uses. That's a Windows Pro system. You can load in Hyper-V, load in all of that stuff, do all the testing you want to do in your labs, in your enclosed environment, learn how to configure all that, and then decide, do I want to go out and spend the 20 grand for a server or whatever you're going to spend? What's it cost you? You get demo versions, you get whatever you got to do. Load Hyper-V in because it's free with Windows Pro. Bring it up, load in, cost you a couple days of your time to know, is that viable? Is that really viable in your environment? Before you call someone, you pay someone to come out, you pay a tech or pay a service company to come out, install a server, install all this stuff, spend thousands of dollars on stuff, and then you have issues or you have whatever conflicts you have. Maybe you don't like it at all. Maybe it doesn't do what you thought it was going to do. You spent all this money on something that you don't like. Maybe it doesn't function well enough for you. Doesn't do enough for you. You need to buy another OS system, security system, whatever you want to put in there. You need to upgrade it. You may need to make it better. Go with another company that has more features. Maybe the features you thought you need, you're not using at all, but you actually need a bunch of other features. You can find that all out by running virtual machines. So these are some of those little things that I really thought were kind of interesting. Because now that opens up the whole other developmental aspect of what you want to do. And if you're a small business, someone at home doing a small business, maybe someone looking to get into a small business, getting into computer programming, doing anything like that, you might want to run a virtual machine. You might actually run a Windows 10 host machine and run a Windows 10 virtual machine just because you're doing computer programming to do your computer programming on, in case you do something that might corrupt or damage your system accidentally. I will say, not intentionally, accidentally. You write a piece of code, takes out a piece of registry, writes over something, has a memory conflict, whatever. It's on a different system than your core system. So I wanted to go through some of that. I know this one's somewhat short, but again, thank you for watching Yates Computers Tips and Reviews. Make sure you head on over and hit subscribe, because there's going to be a lot of interesting content coming out, especially this Hyper-V thing. Computers, again, are moving up with that Windows 11 platform to a performance level that's pretty high. This is more and more interesting. More and more developmental friendly now, because before in old computers, you didn't want to run too many OSs because it just ran slow. You didn't have enough cores. You didn't have enough other things. You'll find out a lot more of that in the setup. Cores, memory, all of the hard drive space, all of these things you need for virtual machines. Old days when you had 1 core, 2 core, 4 core. Nowadays, you got 64 core processors. You can run dual of them in some of computers. 64 cores, 30 some core. That's more than enough for virtual machines. So I wanted to put that out there because it's not server only information. People that understand what I'm talking about, like a 30-some core CPU, is pretty much, you can get that standard now. It's out there. That's what everybody's pushing for gaming and everything else, is all these cores. Well, those cores can actually be used for other features, for other things other than the gaming side. Maybe someone who's into gaming might want to look at virtual servers. Also, might want to look at virtual OSs. Maybe moving all your email and all your other stuff that you don't want off to a virtual server, turning that off, doing your gaming, and then when you want to have those features running, you can turn those features back on, turn that virtual server back on, have that performance difference. There's some interesting concepts there that I thought were really interesting with OSs. You don't have to run Windows 10. Maybe you need to run some older OSs. Windows 7, Windows 8. I haven't really tried XP or anything like that, but you might have software that's not compatible with the new software out, or new OSs out. If you're into engineering, manufacturing, something of that sort, where you need an older XP system to run a particular software to run to a certain cutting machine or anything like that, this might be something interesting to you. Maybe you have someone that doesn't understand that, and they're selling that cutting machine in your upcoming business, and you want to buy that cutting machine. Well, it only runs on a Windows 98 system. Virtualized. You can virtualize it. Get it to communicate. Might have just saved you thousands of dollars knowing that little bit of information. So that's why I wanted to do this video, to explain the OS side. It's not only Windows. It's not only current versions. A lot of it, I haven't really tried some of the really old 95, 98. Of course, I might play with that. This one here has Pro on it. Might play with some of that. Load in some of the stuff to see what works, what don't work. But of course, it's also your hardware-wise, what's going to be compatible. But I kind of thought that was a really, really interesting concept with the Hyper-V. So that's why I started getting interested in doing these videos and this collection in Down the Rabbit Hole 2023, because that was really interesting, because you have the future growth and development. Not to mention you have backwards compatibility on your OSs, on your software, on your whatever you're going to need it to communicate to. If there's a certain program, I have not run into any software that really does not run on Windows 10 or 11, but I know in manufacturing and some of those other things that they say, oh, it'll only run on this older system, and it'll only run on this, and it'll only run on that. Maybe this is an option for you. So, this is what this is about. I know I've rambled on long enough, but I wanted to express that point of the OS itself. The operating system itself is not only a Windows based. And when you see some of this, when I go through some of it, I will go through some of those features and explain some of it. And I will show it so that you are aware of, oh, I am now understanding why he's saying that it's not only Windows based. It's pretty easy software. It can be kind of really overwhelming because it'll hit you with a lot of things, a lot of terms, a lot of different things that you're not used to on an everyday base. But it's pretty easy. Most of these videos, I've pretty much explained enough of it. I'll go through some more details. Again, you can always do your homework, do your research on it to get more details and understand exactly what each of those little configurations are. And what happens if you choose that over that. That was the hardest part. They'll tell you this is what this does, this is what this does, this is what this does, this is what this does. But what's the difference between this one and this one? What's the real differences? That's why I did that hardware video before this, to explain how the network card is, if it's doing a virtual routing, if it's doing what. Again, that's not in these OSs you're going to be loading. That's all the physical hardware that's doing all of that. When you get into the OSs is where you can actually set the physical IP address. This is one of the things I wanted to press on this one, because that took me the longest time to figure out and look up, is where do you set that physical IP address for that virtual machine? If you have more than one virtual machine, odds are you will be setting that physical IP address on or in the virtual OS itself. So let me wrap this one up, because that was the key point I wanted to get across. Linux, Ubuntu, Windows Server, you will set that IP up in that virtual version of that operating system. Alrighty, thank you for watching. Follow along this whole collection. Hopefully I can cover enough categories of down the rabbit hole deep enough, with enough coverage, enough explanation, enough ways to show everybody how this is done. Thank you.